One of the longest running and all-time great TV shows is The Simpsons. It just is. I'm a fan of the first 10 years or so. I haven't really watched a lot over the last, couple decades. Quality's dropped a little. Maybe I'm just getting to be a grumpy old man. I don't know. But there was an episode in season 8. It was titled Hurricane Nettie. It centers on Ned Flanders. If you don't know Ned Flanders much, if you don't watch The Simpsons, Ned Flanders is a very religious, he's portrayed very pious, really very centered kind of an individual. Well, in this episode, there's a hurricane that hits Springfield. It's one of the great things about the way they designed this show is anything can happen in Springfield. Hurricanes, blizzards, anything can happen in the city. And so during this hurricane, the Simpsons retreat into their basement and all sorts of wacky adventures go on. But at one point, Marge Simpson prays. She prays for the hurricane to go away. And she says, and it goes away. It does go away. Amazing, right? You pray and it happens. And so they all come out of the house and there's no damage to their house. And Marge says this. She says, "It just goes to show you that everything will work out if you have faith." Nothing was damaged. And of course, the scene pans over to Ned Flanders' house, and it's utterly destroyed. The man that has all the faith in the world loses his house. So the Flanders family goes to the church for shelter, and Ned is pretty down. He's really lamenting about everything that's happened. So he goes into the sanctuary, and he starts to thumb through the Bible up there, and he gets a paper cut on the Bible, and things just aren't going well for him. And finally he prays this, and he goes, "Why me, Lord? Where have I gone wrong? I've always been nice to people. I don't drink or dance or swear. I've even kept kosher just to be on the safe side." And I thought about that as I was looking at our message for today, because oftentimes there's a lot of confusion among Christians as to what is the right thing to do. Like maybe we should keep kosher. I don't know. Maybe we joke about keeping kosher. I'm not sure. You may have heard of a story this week that came out. I think it was on Tuesday night on ABC World News. There was a priest in Arizona that was being investigated for invalid baptisms. Now, what happened here was, this isn't funny, this isn't a joke, this is very serious. The priest said one word wrong in the baptism ceremony. Apparently he said, "We baptize you," as opposed to "I baptize you." Now for a Roman Catholic, this is a really big deal, because baptism is part of the process of salvation. Whereas we as Baptists, we think, well, how do you have an invalid baptism? It doesn't really make sense to us. But in the Roman Catholic Church, it's a very important thing. And I'm not going to discuss baptism today, but I wanted to bring this up as the different ideas between different Christian groups still today in 2022. This confusion dates back to the very early days of Christianity. And it's changed, but I don't know if it really has gotten much better. In the early days of Christianity, one of the big questions was, are Christians considered Jews? Are Christians part of Judaism, or is it a separate group from Judaism? And this is a question that the Christians in Smyrna have to face. So just as a reminder, my clicker's working again, yes. Here is Asia Minor, modern-day Western Turkey. You can see our 7 churches along with Patmos out there. Smyrna is north of Ephesus there. So you kind of have an idea where we're at. There it is. So the question is, does Christianity fall under Judaism? Do Christians need to be circumcised? Do followers of Jesus need to follow food purity laws? Do followers of Jesus need to go to the temple to make sacrifices? Are there problems with Christians associating or dining with Gentiles? In verse 9, Jesus says this, "I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. It's a pretty strong accusation right there. At this point in history, Christians kind of fell under an umbrella of Judaism, if you will. I don't know how better to describe that. Remember, this is all under the empire of Rome. And Rome has this imperial cult. They have this idea of emperor worship. They have multiple gods, all kinds of stuff, right? Well, Jewish people have their ability to worship their one God. There's oppression, there's a lot of problems, of course, but they're still able to worship their one God. Think about the time of Jesus when we read about this. Jesus went to the temple. Jesus went to synagogue. There was all of this stuff that the Jews were still able to do under Rome. They could still worship this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they did not have to worship the emperor. The problem the Christians of Smyrna were facing was that they were getting pushed out from the protection that they had under Judaism. There were a lot of rumors, and we talked about this in Sunday school, but there's rumors that these Christians are cannibals. Where would that come from? Well, our Lord's Supper. We talk about the Lord's Supper. Jesus said, "Eat my body, drink my blood." So there's this idea that when the Christians are getting together to remember this Lord's Supper, they are literally eating flesh and drinking blood. So there's accusations of cannibalism. The brother-sister thing seems odd to people. We call each other brother and sister, and it sounds weird to people. So Christians are starting to get outside of this protective umbrella of Judaism, and it's becoming more and more difficult to be a Christ follower. Something else to look at in this part, I know the slander of those who say they are Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. If we look back at a couple of other places, Paul talks about this in Romans. Paul says this, "A person is not a Jew who is only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God." Jesus refers to this as well. People are saying that they are Jews. They are saying that they are faithful to God, but they're not so much faithful to God. They're faithful to their law, to their tradition. From John chapter 8. They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever." Continuing on, they said, "Abraham is our father," they answered. If you were Abraham's children," said Jesus, "then you would do what Abraham did." Jesus is saying here, belonging to the kingdom of God does not exist because of who your father was, because of who your grandfather was. Jesus is saying your citizenship in heaven is because of your relationship with Jesus. Doesn't matter what your tradition is. Doesn't matter what your church did 50 years ago. It doesn't matter what your fathers did 100 years ago. It matters what you do today if you believe in Jesus. The accusation that's being made is that they claim that they are Jewish, that they are children of Abraham and of God, but they are only in appearance. They are not in true matters of the heart. "I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich." Their afflictions. Our video this morning from Sunday school described this really well as basically being torture. Afflictions aren't good, but really this is torture that they're going under. Poverty. This is not just not having a new TV or having an old car We're not talking about that kind of poverty. We're talking about a kind of poverty where you do not know where your next meal is going to come from. Poverty where you may starve to death because of this. They're facing affliction, they're facing poverty, but then Jesus says, yet you are rich. How can you be rich if you have no food, you have no home, you have nothing? How can you be rich? It's not material wealth that they have. It's spiritual wealth. Their heart belongs to God. The people of Smyrna, many of the people in all of Rome, had a very strong allegiance to Rome. They were deeply immersed in this imperial cult, this emperor worship, this worship of many gods. And those pesky Christians refused to worship Rome. We compare this letter a little bit to all the other ones. We compare it to Ephesus from last week. And when Jesus was talking to Ephesus, he said, you're doing these things really, really well. And he said, but, never want to hear that from Jesus, do you? That's not what I want to hear from Jesus. You're doing great, but, I think we could all be told the but every once in a while from Jesus, though. But to Smyrna, it's actually all commendation. It's actually all encouragement. You're being faithful, you're doing good things. But the result of that is bad things are going to happen to you. Verse 10, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as a victor's crown. Because of your faith in me, some of you will go to prison. Some of you will die. Some of you will die in prison. Now he says some of you will go to prison for 10 days. Well, is 10 days really 10 specific days here? Well, like with everything in Revelation, there's a few different thoughts on this. One of the thoughts is that it's simply an idea. It's a generic 10 days thing. It could just be some random number that was picked. It doesn't mean 10 days. It just means you'll be there for a while. But there's another thought on this that I've read. Researchers are finding out, possibly, that 10 days was the amount of time someone would be imprisoned before being sent to battle with a gladiator. Which, for a Christian in Smyrna, they're not really in battle with a gladiator. This is execution, of course. But is that what Jesus is saying here? Yep, you're going to go to prison for 10 days. You guys know what's going to happen after that. That's another possibility. Be faithful, even to the point of death. Again, Jesus says some of you will die because of your faith. We talked a lot about this morning. This is not something we face here. It is not a routine thing that we will face death or punishment or any adverse effects because we believe in Jesus. But at this point in Smyrna and in many places in the world today, that is a constant threat. If you have faith in Jesus, you might die because of it. But he says, though, stay faithful, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. New International Version, which I'm reading from now, says victor's crown. Many other translations say, I will give you the crown of life. Very good. But when we dig into this a little bit, there's a couple different words for crown in Greek. Oftentimes, what we think of as a crown is this, right? That's a crown. Here's Queen Elizabeth with her crown. That's called St. Edward's crown. And I found this out the other day. That thing weighs 5 pounds. And if 5 pounds may not sound like a lot, but put a 5-pound sack of potatoes on your head for a while and try walking around with that. That's a lot, right? So, but this isn't the kind of crown Jesus is talking about. Sometimes we sing a song about a royal diadem, a diadem being a crown. This is a diadem. What Jesus says here, though, is a different word. And it's actually a crown of victors in the games. I've really been enjoying the Winter Olympics. I've been watching a lot of curling and hockey and bobsled and luge and all sorts of fun stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but I've really been enjoying it. And something that you may have noticed is at some of the ceremonies, they're not getting their medals right away. They're getting these little pandas with something around it. It's a crown. It's a victor's crown. That's what we're talking about here. It's this little crown, this wreath-type crown. That's a victor's crown. And that is what Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about a royal crown. You're not going to get a crown of an emperor. You're not going to get anything like that. You're going to get a victory crown if you maintain your faith. Another part of the crown symbolism that Jesus gives us is in Smyrna. There's a mountain called Mount Pagus or Mount Pagos. And apparently if you go up to the top, you get this really beautiful panoramic view of the harbor and the city. And that mountain in this time was called the Crown. So you have this highest point. So when Jesus is talking to them, he's using a lot of these visual ideas that people would have. It's like, oh, there's a crown. We got a crown in our city. Another thing that was talked about in our video this morning, that's in a lot of the commentaries, is the idea that Smyrna was destroyed and then rebuilt later on. Well, how does Jesus open his letter? He says, "These are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again." So the Christians in Smyrna are going to recognize this as, well, our city did the same thing. Our city died and came back to life. Our city had a crown, has a crown. Look at that beautiful crown up there. I can receive that crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. Something Jesus says in Matthew's gospel is this: do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. So we talk about this second death. Jesus refers to it again later in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 20, as we're approaching the closing of the book. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. And in verse 14, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. So when Jesus says, if you're victorious, if you remain faithful, even through all this hardship, you will not experience the second death. Your soul will not die. Your soul will not go to hell. Your body will die, as we all will. We may not like that idea. Might be a little scary. But one day we're all going to get there, unless Jesus comes back first. Chances are, every one of us in here will experience the first death, which is the bodily, physical death. But our faith in Jesus Christ prevents us from that second death. The greatest concern that we should have is not what happens to us in our lifetime. It should be what happens to us after our physical death. Now, I can't stand here and tell you exactly what the threshold is to be a saved believer in Jesus Christ. John 3:16 says that whoever believes in him will not perish. What level of belief is required with this? Romans 10:9 says, if you state that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again, if you believe that, you're saved. when we're tested, is when our faith is truly shown. I mentioned earlier we finished watching season 1 of The Chosen. And in season 1, Jesus goes to talk to Nicodemus. This is in John 3. And part of what they show in the series is Jesus offering Nicodemus, asking Nicodemus to follow him. Now, that's not actually in John, but if you go to the end of John, Nicodemus is there with Joseph of Arimathea when they anoint Jesus' body. So in one way or another, Nicodemus is a follower of Jesus. But what I loved about the portrayal in The Chosen was the anguish that Nicodemus is going through. Having to choose between his comfortable life as a married Pharisee, wealth, stuff, position, honor, and giving all that up and following Jesus. And there's a scene in there where Nicodemus is standing there and he wanted to go with Jesus in this, you could tell. But he couldn't leave that life behind completely. And he's standing there and he's crying because he knows what he's chosen. He chose this comfortable, rich life over following Jesus. We're tested like that too. That question comes to us as well. And the Christians in Smyrna were definitely being tested. Stay faithful to God, even if it means being tortured, even if it means starving, even if it means being homeless, even if it means dying. And the question is, where do you place your faith? Is your faith in your job or your bank account or retirement? Is your faith in your best friend, your spouse? Is your faith in your country or your political party? Is your faith in yourself? I can do this all on my own. Is your faith in your Christian denomination? Well, that's why I'm Baptist. That's why I'm Lutheran. That's why I'm Catholic. Is your faith in your local church? Boy, I hope not. When you're tested, what do you fall back on? What or who do you trust? One of those things I listed just now? Or is it Jesus Christ? Are you sure? I think most of you are sitting there going, yeah, I think it's Jesus. Would you die for Jesus? Honestly, would you? It's easy to sit here and say, yep, I'd die for Jesus. But you're not faced with it right now. No one is here saying, I'm going to kill you if you say you love Jesus. You're not facing that right now. But some things that we do face. Would you still say, I love Jesus if it meant living a life of poverty? Or would you pick your wealth over Jesus? Would you still follow Jesus if it meant homelessness? Or would you stay in your comfortable house or apartment? Would you follow Jesus if it meant moving halfway across the globe to some place that doesn't have toilet paper? Or would you stay at home with your 1,000-pack of Charmin that you bought at Costco last week? Most of us will never face death or the threat of death because of our faith in Jesus, as so many believers did in the first century, as so many did in Smyrna. Are we really willing to endure anything for Jesus? I hear us say that, but then we get angry if there's a song that we don't like. We get angry if somebody's sitting in our chair in church. We get angry if the butter wasn't taken out early enough for Wednesday night dinner. If you can't endure hard butter, so to fellowship with your saints. If you can't endure that, how are you going to endure anything when true difficulty comes along? We're a bunch of weenies. Think about it, guys. We are. We're not enduring anything for Jesus today. Did it cross your mind this morning? Well, it's kind of windy out, a lot of snow blowing around. What if you had to walk to church in that? Would you? To worship Jesus? Early Christians faced death to worship Jesus. There are Christians around the world today that face death to worship Jesus. Would you really, honestly, truly be willing to endure anything to follow Jesus? If it meant losing your job, would you still follow Jesus? If it meant losing money, being homeless, would you follow Jesus? We have a race that we must run if we want to receive that victor's crown. And we can receive it if we can stay faithful. Faithful to who? To Jesus Christ. Amen.